So often, when we come to the Bible, it's the passages that we think we know that sometimes we really don't. And I've been learning that afresh this week. I've been reminded of my Sunday school days. Anyone who ever went to Sunday school or has ever been near a church would have come across Jesus feeding the 5,000 so many times before. It's the only miracle, I think, that is recorded in all four Gospels. Matthew, Mark, Luke and John saw fit to put it in there. And I think everybody here growing up was probably within the vicinity of a church. You might not have been fully committed to the Lord, but you would have been probably familiar with this account. And there's so much within it. There's so much to see. But sometimes we can wonder, what am I supposed to see here? What can I take away from this about God, about the Lord? I've heard many things around this that perhaps focus on, not the wrong bits, but they just maybe overemphasize certain elements of this. And there's so much that we can take away. But with all of Jesus' miracles, as with this one here, they point to who Jesus is and what he can do. They direct us to his identity, who this man is. As we're working our way through Mark's gospel and people are trying to get their head around who this man is. Even the disciples themselves really at this point are still, as we'll see as we go through the next couple of chapters, are still getting there. They're still growing in their understanding of this man. I think we are to see from this sign, from this miracle, astonishing miracle, that Jesus is the good, compassionate shepherd who provides for and satisfies his people. That he is the good, compassionate shepherd who provides for and satisfies his people. And when I go there, I mean that this is more than just physical hunger. The sign, as all of Jesus' signs, are meant to point to something greater, something deeper, something, if I can use the word, more spiritual perhaps, in understanding who he is and what he does for his people and how he saves his people. This one points to, as we saw earlier, Jesus as the good shepherd who laid down his life for the sheep. But first of all, before we actually get to this miracle, before we actually get to the content of it, we see Jesus care for his apostles. Jesus care for his apostles. If you remember a couple of weeks ago, we looked at verses 7 to 13 of chapter 6, where Jesus sends out the 12. He sends them out to do all the things that he himself has already done and that they've seen him do. He sends them out to preach, to heal, to cast out demons. And they can go with confidence because they know he has appointed them and he has the authority to do these things. They're not doing it on their own authority, on their own strength, but he has sent them out. And then we had the interlude from verses 14 to 29, that as they go out and as Jesus does his work, Herod hears of Jesus and doesn't really understand who Jesus is, thinks he's John the Baptist come back to haunt him after he had his head cut off. But John's ministry comes to an end there as he is killed. But we get to verse 30, and the apostles have returned to Jesus, it says, and told them all that they had done and taught. So all that they'd been sent out to do, all that had happened, they came and reported back to Jesus. And Jesus, out of care for these men, says, "Come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while." For it says, "For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat." We've seen this pressure on Jesus already, haven't we? Where he's going to towns and villages, he's preaching the gospel, he's doing miraculous work. And of course, everybody wants a piece of him. Everyone wants to see him. The crowds come when they hear of what he can do and the amazing things that he is saying. And he has to find time and fit in time where he can go and rest and go to a quiet place and be alone with the Lord and retreat from the work of ministry. So it says, Jesus has experienced this. When we go to Mark 1, it says that he rose up early in the morning and went out to a desolate place and prayed. And it's like the disciples come looking for him, going, "Come on, there's more work to do." And he's saying, no, we need to go on to the next place. Isn't it wonderful that Jesus models for us rest as well as ministry and work? He does both of those things and says, this is how you are to live. This is how you are to work. They had seen him do all the amazing things, but they'd seen him rest too. And here he reminds them of their humanity. After the busy work of ministry, come away Come away and rest a while. Isn't he good to these men? Isn't he good to us by saying, come away and rest and be alone and pray? And this is what Jesus often did when he was on his own. It got me thinking that when you go right back to the start, right back to the beginning in Genesis, both work and rest are built in. God made both of those things and said they are good. We live after the fall, and so we know both of those things are affected by that. Work can be frustrating. Rest can sometimes not be restful. And those is a result of living in a fallen world. But both are good, and we need to be reminded of that. Some of us by nature are people who go, and fail to rest and trust God to keep the world spinning. And perhaps you need to be reminded of the command of Jesus to come away and rest and even be alone with him. Alone with your own thoughts as well. That's a scary thing sometimes. So to be still and know that he is God. For others, it may be the opposite problem. We live in a culture where there's a lot of positive conversations around well-being and mental health and phrases like self-care and me time and these things going around, not all of which is bad, but there's a danger that we push out anything that is difficult, anything that is too much like hard work, anything that we don't have to do or that we don't, those kinds of things. And actually discovering we're quite good at the resting part. It's that whole work side of things I'm not so sure about, but that God calls us to serve him, to work for him with what he has given us to do. I'm not an apostle, but he's given me something to do. He's given each of us things to do. But also knowing when to come away to rest. And perhaps for others, it's more a case of God is challenging you to take something up and to do something new. Maybe even something hard that you'd rather avoid. And God give us wisdom in these things to know when to do things, when to rest. And ultimately be reminded that we rest. This rest points us to something greater. Resting in the finished work of Christ and the rest that we have to come. Jesus says some beautiful things to his people, doesn't he? He says, come to me, all who are weary and heavy laden. Come to me. My yoke is easy, my burden is light, and you will find rest for your souls. See, Jesus gave them physical rest, but he also promised a greater rest. Not just rest here and now, but rest, eternal rest for your souls. Come unto him today and find rest, now and for eternity. Jesus cared for his apostles. He cared for them. He didn't crack the whip on them. He knew when they needed to rest, when they needed to come away, and encouraged them to do that and to be alone with the Lord at times. And it's so easy to let that slip, isn't it? But he cared for his apostles. And so this was the plan. Verse 32 says they went away in the boat to a desolate place by themselves. Thinking, now's the time. We finally got some time. But we also see following on from that, Jesus' compassion for the crowds. For the crowds that interrupted the rest. They interrupted going away to a desolate place and being alone. As they are coming away, we read it down in verse 33, that many saw them going and recognized them. Said, oh, that's Jesus and his apostles, his disciples. And they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. I really hadn't slowed down and read this verse before. This is something that struck me. I think we're going to go across in the boat, we're going to get away and we're going to rest. And they see them going and run there on foot and get there before them. So I can just picture them coming up to the shore, Jesus in the boat, and go, oh, you're here as well. And sort of they've beat them to it and they're back round on the other side of the shore. A pretty failed escape plan, that one, wasn't it? It comes round and discovers them on the other side already. Now, what might Jesus have thought in this moment? Or what might people think in this moment, more to the point? To look at this crowd and go, oh, just give me a minute. Just leave me alone. I need some space. I need to rest. We've already been doing all that. We're trying to get away. And here we discover you're followed us round. And that's not what Jesus looks at them, is it? Verse 34. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd. And he had compassion on them. Compassion on them. Because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. Isn't that even that a beautiful thing? That Jesus has compassion on them, and that leads him to teach them many things. That could almost come as a surprise. You sort of think he has compassion on them, so he speaks. He teaches them the word, teaches the truth, because they don't have a shepherd. They need a shepherd. Jesus is that shepherd coming in to teach them the truth. But in this moment, Jesus could have looked at them and just seen them as a nuisance, as an interruption, as an inconvenience. But because he's Jesus, he didn't see them that way. He looks out and he has compassion on them. There's this deep love and compassion that comes from the gut as he sees them, and he has to act. He has to do something. He looks at their lost condition and feels compassion that leads to him speaking and teaching them the truth about God. This is so instructive for us as the church, isn't it? And perhaps convicting for us as the church. I read this and I look at Jesus looking out and out with all this compassion and think, how do I look out on the world? How do I look out in the crowds when I walk about the world? Do I look on them with judgment or cynicism? It's easy to get cynical about things, isn't it? Or just despair? How do I look at them? Or do I look at them with the compassion of Jesus and just see, oh, they're lost, like sheep without a shepherd, just like I was, harassed and helpless, as Matthew, I think, puts it. Are we ready to be interrupted by them? For our plans that day to change because situation comes up, somebody comes to us. Often we like to have our days planned out. This is what I'm going to do, this is what I'm going to do, this is what I'm going to do. But sometimes that gets interrupted. And it's not just an interruption, it's somebody that God is putting in your path for you to speak to, for you to serve, for you to draw alongside. Inconvenienced. But it's God putting people in our path. You see, Jesus is the good shepherd. The people had bad shepherds. If you read Ezekiel 34, there's this scathing condemnation of the so-called spiritual leaders of the day. And he says, but I will come and be your shepherd again. And we see Jesus stepping in to do the work that they had not done. Those who fed themselves and built themselves up but had nothing for the crowds, had nothing for the people. And yet Jesus comes and he looks out and has compassion. Is that not just a beautiful moment? If you just think for a moment on Jesus looking out on the crowds. When he looks at them, there's no agenda there. It's just pure compassion, pure love. All he has for them is their good. You know, we talk about there's somebody who has your best interests at heart. Even the person of whom that is true is flawed and sinful and tainted. When Jesus looks out, he looks at us with pure compassion and just a desire for our spiritual good and well-being. He is the good shepherd. He is the one who does teach them and who teaches us, fills us with his word. He's not the shepherd who withholds the truth. He's not the shepherd who bends the truth and breaks the truth to keep people happy. He's not the shepherd who abuses or neglects the sheep, beats the sheep, or uses the sheep for his own ends and purposes or agenda. No, he just looks out with perfect compassion, untainted, and wants what he knows is best for them. Do you know this shepherd today? And take a minute just to think about the way Jesus looked at these people. That is how he looked at you and me, despite all of our sin, despite all that we had done wrong. He looked at us and said, look at the state of them. They're harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. And he brought us into himself. Pure compassion and love for us. Do we know him this morning? He had compassion on the crowds when others might have been irritated or annoyed. He has compassion. Maybe revel in knowing Jesus' compassion for us and love for us. For we too were without a shepherd, weren't we? Was Isaiah say, we all like sheep had gone astray. But the Lord laid on him the iniquity of us all. Peter uses that same language as he references Isaiah all the time and says, for you were straying like sheep, but have now returned to the shepherd and overseer of your souls. We are to return to this all-compassionate shepherd who's calling us to himself. He had compassion on the crowds. Jesus' compassion on them leads to more than just teaching as well. Primarily, we've thought about that's what Jesus came to do. That's the center of his ministry, that preaching and teaching, calling people into the kingdom. As we go through Mark. But it leads to more than that. He also provides for their needs here, doesn't he? Makes me think of is it James, isn't it, who sort of says, what good is it if you say sort of, Lord bless, and then the person's in poverty and you just keep going on. There's that sense of, yes, we bring the truth of the word, but let us not neglect to help this man, this woman here. But here he provides for them. Verse 35 says, when it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, this is a desolate place, and the hour is now late. Send them away to go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. Now, some people here think the disciples aren't being very compassionate. I actually think they are. I actually think they're being very practical. I mean, if you were there, right, and there's thousands of people, and you're going, let's just be honest, it's getting late. We should probably send them away so that they can get something to eat before, before they get hungry, before it all goes wrong. But the question of the disciples is not whether they're compassionate or not. The question that's being asked of them is do they really know who Jesus is yet? Because if they know who Jesus is, they maybe start to ask different kinds of questions, or start to have different kinds of ideas. Do they believe in what he can do? Jesus turns around and says, you give them something to eat. I love that moment. Just looking out in the crowds and going, really, Jesus, how are we going to do this? Don't want to be that guy, but I think we need to think a bit more practically about this. John's account of this same incident records that Jesus said to Philip, where are we to buy the bread so these people may eat? And John actually... Jesus said this to test them, it says. That's what John says, to see what they might do. Jesus is getting a feel of, what do they really think about me? Do they really know me? Do they understand yet? And as we go through Mark, the veil begins to be pulled back and they begin to see and to understand who this man really is. Because this is astonishing. They say, you give them something to eat. And they said to him, shall we go and buy 200 denarii worth of bread and give it to them to eat? Apparently, as it came up in Isabel's reading as well, this was over half a year's wages, 200 days' wages for a labourer. So how are we going to make that happen? I don't know about you, but that seems pretty impossible. And he said to them, how many loaves do you have? How many loaves do you have? Go and see. And when they had found out, they said 5 and 2 fish. Obviously, one of the gospel writers, I think it's Matthew, reveals that this was just one young lad that brought that to offer, and it was all he had. Good for him, he brings it, and that's all that they have. So they bring this 5 loaves, 2 fish, still looking out on thousands of people and not really getting any further ahead. The response shows logical thinking, practical thinking, but not expecting Jesus to do anything out of the ordinary. It's understandable. I think I would be in exactly the same spot, thinking the same thing. And Jesus, through this, is going to teach them something about who he is. Did you see that little bit in verse 39? This is one of the reasons I love hearing the Bible read out loud, and I need to do it more when I'm preparing sermons and stuff. I think I've actually been here before and heard somebody read the passage and go, oh, I missed that bit, and I'm preaching in 5 minutes. And I'm thinking, no, it's not that you have to get everything in, but you realise, just because I just missed it when I was reading through it. But there's this little phrase, verse 39 says, then he commanded them all to sit down in groups on the green grass. When you read slow down and read the Bible, and it's important to do that, isn't it? And maybe that reading out loud, like we talked about before, because just things come up and you say, it's almost annoying. Why did you word it that way? Like, Mark, why did you put the green grass? I know what grass looks like, Mark. I think if you just said grass, I would have understood. I'd be fine, Mark. I'm okay. I know what grass looks like. But he's obviously, he's done it for a reason. He's written it down for a particular reason. This compassionate shepherd looks out on the people and says, sit down on the green grass while I provide for you. He lays me down in green pastures. He restores my soul. He provides for all of my needs. It's as if Mark is just peppering this passage with things to say. Do you see? Do you understand who he is? Sits them down on the green grass. So they sat down in groups by hundreds And by 50s, there's even a Moses-type activity there, the way he stood on the mountain, separated everyone out, and the Lord provided. He takes the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. He looks up to heaven, said a blessing, gave it to his disciples, and they say the fish is divided up between them all. I have so many more questions here. Like, what did that look like, though? How did it happen? How did it kind of go on? And it just miraculously there was just more. It was just there. He looked up to heaven, said a blessing, broke the loaves, and gave them to the disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all. Amazing. Doesn't this just echo the Old Testament God? You know, the one who had them in the wilderness, in a desolate place where there was nothing, and they'd just been rescued from Egypt, and already they're grumbling and saying, just better off dying in Egypt. If we're going to die here, we might as well just die back there. And the Lord provides the manna from heaven. He provides the quail for them. And it wasn't just they just had enough to kind of keep going for a couple of hours, or like half an hour or something. They had so much. He divided that among them all, and says they all ate and were satisfied. So there wasn't anybody who said, I could have gone up for more, like at a buffet, can I do another plateful? No, they were all satisfied. They were all had what they needed. And this satisfaction, again, these signs are pointing to something bigger and better. Jesus had satisfied them for a moment here, for a few hours, but they're going to get hungry tomorrow. They're going to get hungry the next day. But Jesus is the one who satisfies our souls more than just our physical hunger. It's our spiritual hunger, our spiritual thirst. We will get hungry tomorrow. Today, after church, everyone's always hungry after church. You'll be hungry again today. But those who have him will never hunger, never thirst for eternity. He satisfies more than just our physical needs, and he does provide our physical needs, doesn't he? But he satisfies our souls. I'm satisfied in you alone, we sang earlier. But this amazing, there's so much. Verse 43 says that they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of the fish. And people always talk about that significance. Isn't it interesting that there were 12 of those baskets? To these 12 who had said, let's send them away, because and Jesus says, no, don't send them away, keep them here. I can provide for them. It's as if you can imagine each of them with a basket staring at it. Again, familiarity with Bible passages can be dangerous. I'm trying to imagine myself having been there and seen it all happen, the miracle and everything, and then standing there with a basket full afterwards going, there's more left over. There's even more left over. There's more here. Somebody said it's almost, one commentator said, like a spiritual souvenir of what had just happened. You're sitting there going and realizing he's done it. He's multiplied it, and there's more. Holding that basket and saying, who is this man? Who is he that he can multiply, that he can calm the storms like we saw? He can heal the sick, he can do this, and he can multiply fish. And those provide what appears to be like manna from heaven. He is amazing. He is the God-man. God walked amongst them. And it challenges me this morning, I don't know about you, to reflect on, do I believe he can do this kind of thing? And by that I mean, do I believe in his power? Do I believe that the same Saviour who multiplied, who did all of this, who did all of what we've seen in Mark's Gospel, has the power to do immeasurably more than I can think or ask or imagine? And I don't have the greatest imagination as well. He can do well more than I can think or ask or imagine. Do I believe he can save lost souls of Stonehaven, as we've been praying for this morning? Do I believe that he can build his church, that he can do amazing work around us and across this country and across this world? Do I pray as if that were true? Sometimes feel I pray too small. God can do immeasurably more than I ask or imagine. To save lost ones around us like we were, the ones without a shepherd. He is more than able. Let us believe and pray that he can do those things and still say, let his will be done. He is more than able to do more than we can ask, think, or imagine. This one who multiplied fish and loaves, and there was a ton left over. Jesus cared for his disciples. He had compassion on the crowds, the lost. And so he taught them and provided for their needs. In doing so, he showed himself to be the shepherd, the true shepherd, the good shepherd. Have you come to him and put your faith in him, the one who laid down his life for you and took it up again, as we thought about earlier, so that we might be saved, that we might be satisfied in him? We might have life forever, dwell in his house forever. He was so compassionate that he went to the cross for us, for our sins. That's where his compassion took him. He looked on our lostness, and it led him all the way to the cross. If you have come to him, do you again need to rest in that truth? Remember that truth, that we are secure in him. And are you living like him, becoming like him? With the help of the Spirit, growing in compassion for God's people and for the lost, and acting upon that compassion, led to speak the truth of God's word, speak the truth of the gospel, led to help in some very practical way like Jesus did. And do we believe in what this shepherd can do? Are we praying for him to do great things? And to do great things with the little things in our life? May we all see who this man is. Let us trust him and follow the good shepherd who has promised to lead us home. Let's pray together.